Welcome to another riveting episode of Risk and Return. I'm Charlie Gasparino with my partner from S3 Partners, Bob Sloan, the maestro of data. Bob, we have a packed show today. We're going to talk a lot about New York City because you heard that sort of explosion that occurred the other night. That was a socialist Zohran Mamdani becoming mayor. He's the Democrat. He's the odds-on favorite. He won the Democratic primary over Andrew Cuomo, and we're going to have a great guest to talk about that and unpack the fiscal and even the investment implications of that. Rich Farley, a longtime Wall Street lawyer who wrote a book about the New York City financial crisis, will be joining us shortly. But before we get into that, and that will be investment oriented too. If you own muni bonds, you want to listen to this because it's key. But right now, Bob, what do you got going? What is your data saying? And you spoke with a major investment bank recently. You gave them a little run through on some of your data. What were you sharing with them?
So we did a very, very, very large webinar. We had 400, actually more like 500 of the largest institutions in the world on the call at the same time, listening to how we, as we are breaking down on this show, how we broke down certain battleground stocks. So for the first time really ever, using our data, you can see now where the active long position and short position are equal, or skewed a little bit short or skewed a little bit long. So they're very popular stocks like Kohl's, for example, like C3CI, AI, C3AI. There's Transocean. There's a lot of stocks out there that are battleground stocks. Now, why is that important to the audience? Well, we'll tell you why. It turns out when there's an equal amount of actively managed longs and shorts, it turns out the return of these stocks is a really bad risk and reward bet.
On which side?
On both sides.
Interesting.
So because all it takes when things are evenly matched, it just takes a little dry powder to come in on either side to make things explode.
So you stay away from these stocks?
You have you have the situation where you have stocks that are short and long, and if a little bit more short comes in, what happens is that volatility picks up tremendously. So there's a word in Wall Street called gamma, which means acceleration. And when things are evenly matched, any capital coming in, so if, let's say in a stock like Kohl's, it's a great example because it's a tariff stock. You see that what's Kohl's trying to do? People are trying to save money, so they go a little down market, but they can't make up in volume for the margin that they're getting squeezed because of some of the tariffs that are there. So that you have the longs are saying, you know what, they can make it up on volume. The shorts are saying, no, tariffs are too powerful. And so they're clashing. As soon as, let's say, a little more buying came in on the long side, it would explode because you have these forces. You have actively managed money battling against each other day after day after day. And as soon as the return is made, let's say a little more long money comes in, they'll leave because they're on to the next trade.
So you're saying, let's just break it down. You're saying stay away from these stocks more or less, or
absolutely
danger.
Stay away from stocks.
Can you give a few examples besides Kohl's?
Sure. Transocean, Kohl's, C3AI. I think our producer has a list. We can bring that up on the screen.
Yeah, there we go.
If we could see that a little bit larger so that we could take a look at it, that would be great. There's a lot of stocks here that you can see on the screen.
So if you're the viewer, look at these stocks. What Bob is saying is that we don't give investment, we don't tell you what to do. We give you the data. The data is saying that these stocks, just be prepared, are going to be volatile and they go either way based on this. And there's 500 stocks in the S&P. You might want to choose the other 500 or whatever, right?
So these stocks are battlegrounds. They're very equally matched. And you can see on our chart, you have almost about an equal amount of actively managed longs and shorts. So now how do you say, how does S3 do this, right? So how do we come up with this data? Well, as it turns out, Charlie, legacy, and I really believe this is going to be a tremendous financial issue. We're going to talk about the tremendous financial issues in New York City later on in the show in the muni bond market. But a real financial issue right now is how technology and financial information intersect. It's very important. So we are a big believer that people use legacy inputs as a default. They're used to using information and they don't question whether the information is right or wrong. So one of the things that's kind of interesting, for example, on disclosures like 13F. 13F, as it turns out, tells you the amount, but it doesn't tell you how or by what cohort. And it doesn't tie into turnover, you see? So it gives you a little bit, but it doesn't really give you the story. So we actually dug a lot deeper, got into, hey, there's actually really valuable information here. And now we can, for these battleground stocks that were on the screen before, we can say, you know what? 2/3 of the money that's in a stock on the long side will never trade. A third will trade. Now, we are the world's gold standard for short interest. You pair those two things together, now you know whether the stock is skewing long, skewing short, or they're equal. And over the next 90 days, that can tell you the volatility. So for example, for these battleground stocks, we look at situations over the last 10 years when stocks are equally long, the active piece, right? So not passive, that trades every day versus short. The volatility is 4 times higher than your average index. And when things go bad, it is 3 times as bad.
So just stay away.
Just stay away.
Well, let me ask you this. Any other stocks you want to hit on today before we turn to our main topic?
Well, before we get to your headlines, one thing, we made a call on Carmex last week, which turned out to be a wrong call, and that's going to happen. We know that. Stock was up 3%. We had a bearish call on it. Nothing in our model came out this week. Around July 4th, not a lot of firms issue earnings at this time of the year, so it's a little light for us.
Yeah.
But
You're
we're
still
never going
batting
to force
900.
it.
Bob, you're still batting 900, so I'm not.
Yeah, no. So this is exactly the point: is that we are right 2 out of 3 times. And if you're betting $2 each time, you're still up good money.
Of
So
course.
that's what we want to talk about. That's why our data is valuable, because there are innovative ways you can take data that's available and make them work for you, the average investor, hopefully listening to our show.
And Ace Greenberg used to say, I make bad trades, but the worst trade is holding on to a bad trade
Oh,
and
well,
just not moving on.
you know what? I tell you, my first interview on Wall Street, and this is the question I got asked. It was a great question. They said, what makes a good salesperson? Now, everybody says, oh, you got to be honest, whatever, this, that, and the other thing. Oh, that's true. The answer was be a good listener.
Mm.
Then they said, what makes a good trader? And, I don't know, 24 at the time. I had no idea.
Yeah.
They said the ability to take a loss. And what they meant by that was you admit your mistakes, you take your losses, and you move on to the next thing.
Ace was one of the best traders, and that was what his skill is. Let's get to some headlines, and the headlines will dovetail right into our next guest. At the top, I'm gonna bury the lead here. Paramount deal. David Ellison of Skydance. He's telling people he thinks he's going to get it done. The headlines don't suggest it will get done, but he's positive. He thinks Trump is going to approve the deal. And remember, there's a side lawsuit where Trump is suing CBS, where that's the company that he's trying to buy. He's trying to buy Paramount. CBS is a subsidiary. He thinks they're going to get through all that. I wrote about it in the Post. Be that as it may, he's looking positive on the deal, and Paramount trades under the symbol Para. Just so you know, the stock might reflect that optimism soon, or maybe not, but just that's what he's saying. Number two, trade deals. Trade deals are coming. I mean, I know we've been consumed. The national headlines have been consumed by war, by the Iran-Israel conflict, but trade deals are coming. Names like Japan, I'm hearing, South Korea, Vietnam, India. Trump touted something on kind of obtuse on his Truth Social about China, like coming to terms. But we let that play out. That's going to be a tough one. But if they've reached something on China, the markets, that's market positive.
Something
So
just crossed the tape that said they did.
they did. Okay. So, but I want to see the devil's in the details. You know what I'm saying? I want to see what the deal is. The other thing is, Bob, is the explosion in New York City, the socialist Zohran Mamdani winning the Democratic primary, which in a heavily Democratic city um, makes him the odds-on favorite to become mayor, and it's freaking out the entire business community and many more people. Now, how did this happen? Um, I'm not going to do it justice here. We're going to unpack this. Bob, I want to bring in a special guest and an appropriate guest for this occasion because, yeah, we cover stocks, but we cover a lot more than that. We cover the economy. We cover what's happening in the epicenter of capitalism as well. It's called New York City, and something major just happened. A legitimate socialist, Zohran Mamdani, has been won the Democratic nomination for mayor. It was somewhat of a surprise, not a total surprise to people like me, who's been covering this for a while, covering as the city has become increasingly more left wing, and also covering the fiscal situation of the city as it becomes increasingly more socialist and left wing. And that's why I thought I bring in our next guest, a guy named Rich Farley. Rich is an old friend of mine. He's a lawyer for Kramer Levin. He's been on Wall Street for many years. He's also written a fascinating new book called Drop Dead, and it chronicles the 1970s fiscal crisis, which, by the way, I kind of grew up in. I grew up in Westchester, but it was intrinsically tied to my life because my father was out of work a lot during the fiscal crisis because he was in construction and all the infrastructure building stopped in New York City in the 70s. And so the fiscal crisis had a huge impact on me and my family. And it was a sort of a seminal moment in New York City history because it taught us that you can't spend what you don't have. And now we are lurching back to a sort of ideology that would make the leadership in the 1970s look like Reagan, Ronald Reagan. And Rich, I want you give us a little background about yourself and talk about the book, and let's then try to bring the conversation, fast forward to now.
Sure, Charlie. Thank you for having me on, first of all. I am a finance lawyer. I've been on Wall Street now for 35 years. I've also been interested in financial history and politics. I've written two other books. And during the COVID years, there was a lot of concern that the city might have a fiscal crisis because of the obvious economic consequences of that.
Lockdowns, shutting
Correct.
everything down.
Lockdowns, 100%. And the tsunami of federal money that came in essentially bailed the city out during that period of time. But as I was assisting clients and others as to what maybe to expect, I did a deep dive on 1975. It turned out to be a lot different than what the conventional wisdom tells us happened. So I said, gee, there's a story here. And it became sort of a longer treatment in my mind, and that ultimately became the book.
Well, the story, as I know, the fiscal crisis, and I've written a lot about this. I worked, just full disclosure, I worked as something known as the bond buyer back in the day,
Right. I
where I
remember those
covered New
days.
York City municipal bonds and New York
Yes.
City finance. I did investigative reporting on city budgets and all sorts of financial shenanigans. But I got to know the New York City budget. I got to know a lot about the fiscal crisis because the overhang of the fiscal crisis is still sort of here in the city in the sense that there is a structure in place
Correct.
on bonds that the bondholders get paid first before any money goes into the general fund because of the fiscal crisis.
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe,
Right.
right. There's a law. You can
Right.
always change the law, but that's
Yeah.
what it says.
Well, and also you need a judge to enforce the law. And I'm not sure a judge exists who's going to pay bondholders before he pays old
If
ladies for their
if
heating bill.
Well, if Zohani wants to violate the law and he finds a judge, that would be interesting because then no one will buy New York City debt again. But let's leave that to the side.
Yep.
There was the New York City in the 70s was mismanaged.
Correct.
No one understood what money was coming in, what money was leaving. They
Correct.
essentially financed their budget by rolling over short-term debt.
Absolutely.
And
Now, here's what happened specifically, Charlie. They engaged in all kinds of fraud. They would do things like send real estate tax bills to embassies, which are tax exempt,
right,
march that down to Solomon Brothers, do a bond deal, a tax anticipation note,
Right.
knowing the taxes are never going to get paid and hoping they could find legit taxes when it came time to refinance that debt. They would do things like, gee, you're not supposed to borrow long term to finance operating expenses. That's a
Right.
no-no in municipal finance. There's a constitutional provision and laws in New York State to prevent that. They did things like saying, well, gee, teachers have a 30-year career, and let's say 10% of teachers' expense is lifetime training, which we should count as a capital asset. So they would borrow in the long-term market to pay
Right.
teachers'
Or
salaries.
they would finance their long-term liabilities with short-term debt, which is
Correct, which is
now,
what they did.
but let me
Yep,
just frame this, and then I want
sure,
your thoughts now.
sure.
That was fiscal mismanagement writ large. The banks then said, we're not buying the debt anymore because we don't know where the money's going. And in about 5 or 6 years, with a lot of state help and some federal help, they kind of figured things out. They created a budget that it's monitored and people watch it, and it got better. And Trump, Koch replaced Beam. We had the Wall Street boom years in the 80s.
That was it. It was the Wall Street boom.
Yeah, so then you had a dip with Dinkins, and then Rudy came in and Bloomberg, and then we had De Blasio, and then this is where I'm saying, isn't so our budget is in better shape now because we know what it is. It's balanced by gap, but the politics, believe it or not, are worse. The New York City Democratic Party, which kind of controls the city, has never been socialist
Correct.
in my lifetime, at least.
Correct.
It is now, and it's
Yes.
and it's crazy socialist. Explain what that means.
Sure. Now,
For
there
the
were a number of
economy.
factors that, as you know, you lived it, that got the city in trouble in 1975, macroeconomic issues. There were two things that were specific to New York City. Not every city had a fiscal crisis in 1975.
Right.
There were two things specific to New York. One, which we talked about, was the chicanery in the accounting and the budgeting. The other was New York City provided services to residents, to citizens, that other cities did not, that they left to the states and they left to the private sector. New York City had a university system, a hospital system, prisons, courts, all run by the city. Taking on too many obligations is really what set the city down that path in 1975. And you see that now with Mr. Mamdani, who's looking to build supermarkets, who wants universal childcare for everyone, I guess, until you're an adult, and all sorts of traditional services that were left to other governments or to the private sector. And when you start socializing, free buses, of course, you and I know that nothing's free. GM doesn't hand you the bus driver doesn't volunteer, nothing's free. But when you start taking on government responsibility for those things, you then run the risk of not being able to have a balanced budget. And at that point, the political pressure to play games, because nobody wants to be the mayor to say, oh, that free bus, I'm taking that away from you. The child care, I'm taking that away from you. So when government gets too large, the incentives to play games with the books becomes almost overwhelming.
Bob, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. So what do the unions do?
Well,
You
yeah,
need union help to be elected to be mayor. That's
correct.
It's the fact in New York City.
In fact, in 1967, Victor Gottbaum, who ran District Council 37, the largest union,
Right.
said, we in effect elect our own boss. And that's been true for the 60 years ever
A
since.
long time. So,
Correct.
So they look at a candidate like Mamdani, who, has unicorn type stuff and rainbow type stuff. And I don't mean rainbow in terms of the maybe
LGBTQ.
yeah, I don't mean it that way. I meant
No, right. You mean rainbow like
pot of
pie in the
gold.
sky.
Yeah, probably
Yeah.
because we're using kind of fairy tale money examples. What do they do? What do they,
Well,
they look at this
they
fellow
have a
and say, "Hey, he's a brute
concern.
force,"
Well,
and he's mastered the modern political campaign. He did a great job at defeating the old machine.
he sure did.
And
He's
he
almost
did.
like
And
AOC 2.0. I mean, she sort of
exactly.
started in social media. He's taken it to another level.
He took it to another level. And
Yep.
so we ignore this. And I say we because I would certainly vote for Cuomo over him any day of the week. Absolutely. All day, every day. Flaws and all. Don't care. Rational person, understands how business gets done, wants to get his own business done. That's the way things work. This is different.
Yep.
So
Well, look, the
what do
the
they do?
unions by and large back Cuomo. Okay, he got more labor support than any other candidate because the union leadership realizes that it doesn't do well when there are fiscal crises because they're going to come knocking on the union's door at some point for them to be the bridge financing to get to the ultimate bailout
Right.
and say, you have these massive pension funds. Let's figure out a way to get you to loan those to us to tide us over until the inevitable Washington bailout. So they've been down this path too, and they remember the difficulties that they had to suffer. And also, there will be wage cuts. There will be cuts in benefits. They are doing quite fine without having this level of growth of government and socialism.
So,
So
Rich,
I
let's
wouldn't be
play.
surprised if Eric Adams gets the union endorsements that went to Cuomo.
So let's just play it forward, and then I'm
Mhm.
a little bit. Let's just say he gets elected, and we're gonna get into. Do you think he's gonna get elected in a minute?
Mhm.
What happens? Do businesses walk out day one? It's easier to leave now than ever before.
Absolutely. Now, in 75, Wall Street couldn't leave because you had a requirement. They actually traded stocks in the New York Stock Exchange, so you had to be
Right.
there. Investment banks, there were rules that you had to have an office in New York City. The balance sheet banks, there was no unfettered interstate branch banking in those days. You sort of had to be in New York where the deposits were. That's over now. You can literally flip the switch on the computer on Friday in Manhattan and flip it on in West Palm on Monday and seamlessly exit. Okay. And you were at those events, Charlie, that we heard Jamie Dimon and Larry Fink all say, well, we haven't cut employment in New York City. Our growth has been in other states, principally Texas and Florida.
Right.
So if you start taxing businesses, and he wants to have a corporate tax rate of 11% on businesses and have a 2% surcharge on anyone with an income, individual taxes over $1 million, the competitive dynamics of making it more advantageous to move elsewhere are going to become
Now,
overwhelming.
as you know, the mayor cannot really raise taxes, even city taxes unilaterally.
Right.
Needs the state. The state has
I don't
turned.
think Albany's much better,
Yeah, I
Charlie.
agree
And
with that. It's
and
turned left.
I think Hochul's going to be scared to death that if she vetoes a tax increase at the behest of the new mayor, that she's going to get primaried by Tish James, who was jumping all over Mamdani at his victory
Right. I
celebration the other
mean,
night.
people forget that the New York State legislature right now is far left. There's a lot of
Correct.
Mamdani supporters there. So just remember that, when you start,
And it's almost veto proof, right? I mean,
yes,
it could
yes,
become veto proof
he
too.
could become veto proof. So there's that. Now I want to get to your opinion on, is he going to become the next mayor? Now, something I've been reporting in the Post a lot lately, business community support seems to be like Cuomo seems to, listen, I spoke with Andrew recently. He's half defiant and half not. He's suggesting that that he might stay in, he might leave. He's telling supporters that are very skeptical that Adams can't win. By the way, the Cuomo people have sent around a survey recently, a flash poll that shows Adam, trailing Mamdani one-on-one tremendously, and Cuomo winning. I literally just got this. They're
Yep.
trying to make the case that he's still the most electable person in the race. A lot of business people I talk to are skeptical of that.
Yeah.
They don't
Let's
think
walk
that.
through the numbers, Charlie.
Right.
The numbers don't lie, and I can give you a path to someone other than Mamdani. He got what, about 425,000 votes. Let's assume he's going to get 80% of the Lander and Adrian Adams votes. That gets him to 550,000 votes. There was 1.15 million votes in the last mayoral election. So if he's already at 550, he just needs 25,000 votes to win this. So even in a one-on-one race, he will be very tough to beat by either Cuomo or Adams. If you can expand the electorate and bring the number of voters in this election to the polls, like you did when you had Dinkins Giuliani 93, where 1.75 million voters came to the polls, then you can beat Mamdani. Okay. And who do we think can do that better? I think Eric Adams can do it better because I think he's got a better ground game, and I think he's going to be able to get the union support, which I
But
think is going to be skeptical of
I just
Cuomo.
full disclosure, I
Right.
like Andrew. I've known Andrew for years, but just let me make this point, Bob. And then I wanted to go to Bob. Andrew softly attacked Mamdani during this campaign. In my view, I listened to Andrew on the Barry Weiss podcast, where instead of calling him out for his global intifada, which can easily be translated into anti-Semitism, he would call him pro-Palestinian. You know, I mean, if you really believe this guy's an existential threat to New York in both a social and economic way, you call him a communist. You call him what he is. You call him an anti-Semite. You know, because that can be interpreted that. I mean, he didn't do that, and I think Adams would do that. To be honest with
And
you,
I think you've got to attack his competency,
that too.
Charlie. This is a 33-year-old who hasn't done anything.
Right,
By
lucky
the way,
sperm
guys,
kid.
his math.
Go ahead.
Yeah. First, a couple of different things. His math is incredible to me. Oh, it's just 2% on $1 million. Yeah, but people in New York City that pay the most taxes make a lot more than $1 million. So, it's only $20,000. This either it's bad math or it's misdirection or both.
That's an incremental 2%, by the way.
That's right. No, it's an incremental 2%, right? So, it's very sleight of hand. It's very slick stuff. The fact is, no one called Charlie make a great point. No one has labeled this particular candidate. He is telling you what he is. And we are afraid to say that's who you are.
Oh,
And
let's
Trump,
back up. Not we.
what does Trump
Bob, no.
what does Trump do? Because what was so interesting in the general election, how many very liberal Jewish New Yorkers voted for Trump, right? And they said they never would, but they did. So is there, and if you play this out, it comes down to federal dollars bailing out the mismanagement of trying to spend things you cannot raise for, right? Or trying to issue bonds based on totally, fraudulent, revenue streams. Eventually comes to the government. What does Trump do?
I think the best thing Trump can do right now is offer Curtis Sliwa a job and get him out of the race.
Well, let's talk about that. How do you think this shakes out? Does Cuomo drop? I kind of think he will, because
I think he
his
will.
business community support. I mean, listen, he may send around these polls, but the impression I'm getting from businessmen, and these are the guys you're reading about in the paper, is that you had your shot. Now, these are private conversations I had with them. You had your shot, you blew it. You didn't starkly delineate say this guy is bad and here's why. Just think if Cuomo ran as a fire-breathing, almost conservative candidate, where he said, listen, I'm not going to raise the minimum wage. He already said he was going to raise it 20%. He kind of gave into the left. If he really rhetorically attacked Mamdani, well, he could turn around and say, you know what? I'm the real Republican candidate here. I'm going to run as an independent for the forgotten working class of this city that didn't vote. But he can't really do that because he didn't rhetorically set himself up. So I don't think he will have support. Now, again, he's a stubborn guy, so who knows how long it's going to last. But I think eventually he leaves, and I think Trump probably calls up Curtis and says, "Get the hell out." Now, do you think that's going to happen? Is that a scenario?
Yes, I think that is going to happen.
Interesting. When?
Well, timing is everything in life, and if you're Curtis, you wait until it starts to hurt, and you have the most leverage in terms of cutting the best deal you can for yourself at that point.
Or how about you run with Adams as his police commissioner? Or
that would be perfect.
Or his director, or his commissioner of public safety. We do have a good police commissioner in Jessica.
Well, that's true too. I think that she's one of his biggest selling points. Her and Randy Mastro, I think, was also a very good hire as first deputy mayor. But there could be something to get Curtis involved on a ticket of some sort in a capacity for the city, or just create a position, right? You can make him your czar of something. But yeah, I think getting him involved, but out of the race, would be an ideal answer.
Charlie, what happens to TikTok? You get an outright socialist in the citadel of capitalism, bringing all sorts of fairy dust. So, one thing, what did this guy study in college? What did he
went to a liberal arts school.
Wasn't it film or something? Degree? Yeah.
Does anybody know?
That's a great question. It's clearly not math because he can't add. But
so here's what this is the
not econ because he knows nothing about that either.
What did he study? You know, he's a young
Well,
guy.
I have my trusty Google right here. Let's see what he
What
studied.
did he major in?
Zohan
Because
Mamdani. Give me
because
1 second.
thing, right? We have people are frustrated they can't get good jobs, but when you study things that don't matter, this is the job you get, and then they turn out to be TikTok geniuses, and all of a sudden, bam, the guy's the mayor of New York. I mean, it's just friggin' nuts.
Um,
What happens to TikTok, Charlie? What do you
by the
think?
way, before running for office, Mamdani worked as a foreclosure prevention housing counselor, assisting lower income non-white homeowners in Queens with eviction notice and efforts to remain in their homes. He said that experience motivated him to run for office.
Uh,
Mamdani is a fan of hip hop. I'm reading his Wikipedia page. He has composed and produced rap music. Um, I mean, by the way, I don't see exactly what he studied here. Other than that, he went to a college called Baudouin. Did I say it
Bowdoin, yeah,
right?
Bowdoin.
it's up
You know,
in Maine, I think.
He went
Bowdoin,
to
yeah.
Bowdoin College. Okay.
It's a legit liberal arts school.
But it's a legit liberal arts school, but okay.
Legit and
This
liberal
guy the
arts
reins of the
sometimes is an
biggest city in the world?
oxymoron,
Come on. Come on.
No, yeah, listen, I agree with you, but it's just it's we're obviously playing with fire here. And I don't care where he went to school or what his degree is in. It's his espoused views. And listen, if he got a degree in music history and he came out and started a small business and made a lot of money, I'd be tempted to vote for him. I don't care. But this is obviously, I mean, it's rich parents, lucky sperm kid, rap music, the whole thing. I mean, this is not someone you want, holding $105 billion budget, which is what the New York City budget is.
Charlie, New York City's budget and employees, I think, makes it the fourth or fifth largest government in the country.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, California's up there, number one, and then we're kind of like right there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it's huge and it's complicated and it's and utopia. Listen, we there's so many reasons why this guy's bad. I guess we got to get into, just before we wrap this up a little bit. I want to get into your book. Does your book have any lessons for us, and did it foreshadow any of this?
Yeah, I couldn't have predicted. This is the gift that I haven't lived a wholesome enough life to deserve to get Mamdani when my book's out and trying to sell it. But I'll take it. It talks about how at the end how a certainty in politics is that the politicians will spend all the money until there is no more money. Okay, and that when there is the alignment of negative economic macro effects and maybe some micro ones like having a socialist as your mayor, there will be another fiscal crisis and there will be another Washington bailout. So the difference this time is New York is not a swing state where the president or any candidate for president really cares. There's nothing you can do to win New York if you're a Republican or lose it if you're a Democrat. And we had 41 electoral votes. Now we've lost some electoral votes. There is no Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. The 74 midterms were overwhelming Democratic majorities in Congress. That's not the case anymore. So when the inevitable bailout comes, and no president's going to let New York devolve into chaos, it is going to come some very tough strings. Like, you want the money? No sanctuary city. Get rid of your DEI programs that I don't like. Get rid of this, get rid of that. You don't like that? No money. And the unions will pressure the mayor and the state will pressure the mayor to take that deal, because if not, then the state is probably going to see itself in a fiscal crisis.
Okay, so I'm a New York City. I own New York City bonds. Maybe you do. Do you as well?
I do not.
Okay, I do. Um,
Watch those trading. Watch that secondary market very
I know, but
carefully.
why do I have to care about the secondary market if and this is from the fiscal crisis, and you
Yep.
know this. There's on the Financial Control Act, if you own GEOs, and I do own GEOs,
Yep.
you get first lien on property taxes. It's in
That
the
was the
state
case back then too, Charlie, but they did not enforce it. What they said was essential city services have to get paid for. We're not going to pay Charlie.
No. That was post. This is post. This is
There's not a judge in New York. I will predict right here. There's not a judge in New York who is going to pay bondholders before they pay the police
So
and the
let me
fire
just
and the
say, so
essential
you
service.
really believe that Mamdani can unilaterally say we're not going to pay the bondholders here?
Correct. I don't think there's and also you can have municipal bankruptcy filing, which
Well,
you
that's a
couldn't
whole
do in
other story.
75,
You could file for bankruptcy and then everything stops. But my point is,
which is what they would do, by the way.
okay, so he wouldn't just stop paying.
No, he would file. You didn't have the bankruptcy option back in 75 because you had to have a majority of your creditors sign the bankruptcy petition, which when you have thousands of bondholders was impossible. They changed the law because of 75 that said only to confirm the plan do you need a majority of the creditors,
So
Richard,
so he would have to declare bankruptcy and then screw everybody.
which is what he would do. Yeah.
Richard, I got one question. Maybe we can go on a couple more minutes because this is so good.
Go, keep
I think
going.
I think we got to keep going. So if you're Mayor Adams, you're up against this guy who's got a real social media juggernaut behind him.
Mhm.
How do you attack him? What
I-
if you were
yeah.
Mayor Adams' political counsel right now?
Yep.
Mayor, this is what you have to do to win. What would you tell him?
I would attack his competence, his lack of experience. I would not get into a lot of the ethnically sensitive issues. I would leave that off to one side. You can do that in a way that's indirect, okay? But I think Adams can come there and say, I was borough president, I've been mayor for 4 years. I can run the city through
Crime
difficult
is
times.
down thanks to Jessica and me. And
Right, right. He's got to say, I've made some mistakes. I've learned. I put some people in positions that I should have, and I've learned my lesson. And if he can have Randy and Ms. Tish right next to him, I think that could be compelling to people who have concerns about the government integrity issues.
when does
How about the value of your house is going to go down 15 to 25%?
People who own their homes are already voting for him.
Fair. How about,
um,
okay, well, how about this? How about the home you're renting is going to be uninhabitable because the owners are not going to pay for upkeep. They're not going to pay for keeping things current. They're just not going to do the irrational things that a socialist policy demands of them.
Yeah, I could see an ad with a small business owner immigrant saying, I'm a small business owner. I have the bodega, I have this, and I work very hard to help my family. These taxes are going to kill me. If the building I live in is not kept up, I'm going to have to do it. I think there's a way to do this while still having a populist appeal.
And
But
then the
yeah.
other way around, I got to ask the other way around.
Mhm.
You're a Mamdani supporter. Why?
I think he's a very attractive personality. He is a gifted retail politician, in some ways more gifted than AOC, but certainly has the same skill set in terms of media. He is a compelling personal individual. I was talking to a congressman who served with him in Albany, who said everyone disagreed with him, but everyone liked him.
Yeah.
You know, he's a very likable individual.
and Andrew, unfortunately, can come across like really sharp-elbowed, what is Andrew doing right now, you think? Or have you heard anything?
I have not. I think he's having conversations with his inner circle, Charlie, to decide all of the things we touched on now. Do I stay in? Do I drop out? Do I endorse? Do I not endorse? How do I play this? I may see him this weekend. We're both invited to the same wedding.
Okay.
So if I see him at the wedding,
Let me know.
I'll give him a shout.
It was interesting that I was interviewing, I don't want to say the guy's name, but I was interviewing somebody asking, would you support Cuomo? Cuomo is like on the brink. He goes, I just got an email from him and a text from him saying that Adams is unelectable. And the guy says, this guy had his shot. That same person who told me that, so he was dismissive of the text that he got from Cuomo. This guy's raised money for Cuomo.
Yep.
This guy was one of the people at the at Gracie Mansion, not Gracie, at City Hall today, speaking with Mayor Adams about plotting strategy for him to win. That if this guy, I don't want to say his name, he's prominent, he's a known name. If this guy is backing Adams, it's Cuomo has no shot. His support is done.
I think he ultimately will make the decision to drop out of the race, because I think with he and Adams both in the race, neither one of them is going to have much of a shot.
Right. It has to coalesce behind one. The two.
And you think, and let me ask you this. Let me think you this.
I think Adams has a much better a ground game. I think he is.
So what to address Andrew's belief that that the polls are showing him ahead of Mamdani right now in a two-way, and Adams getting crushed. What do you make of that?
Again, you can make polls dance a jig. It depends on what you poll, how you ask the question. Is this likely voters? Is this, people who voted? And if the strategy is I have to expand the voting base from what's voted in the past 2 or 3 mayoral elections, which I think you have to beat Mamdani, you've got to say to yourself, who is better positioned to do that?
Yeah, and who's better positioned to scare the hell out of the electorate? I think one of the problems that Andrew doesn't want to do for some reason, maybe now he'll do it, but it's too late, is he didn't want to scare people about this guy.
Well, I think he had the rap, right or wrong, of being at times sharp-elbowed, as you mentioned, and heavy-handed. And I think the fear among his campaign advisors was we don't want to show that side of Andrew against a very, pleasant and personable opponent who's very likable. So you've got
but I mean
that
he's
clash to
likable,
begin
but
with.
he's likable, but he could be anti-Semitic or in
Correct.
policy. So I mean, I don't know how you win that.
Charlie, let's call it out. He is anti-Semitic. Period.
I don't know what's in his brain cells, but when you start telling me globalizing
he says things that make me very uncomfortable.
He is
on that issue. I don't want to get anybody sued by calling somebody a name, but when you started your chapter of Students for Justice for Palestine, when you're chanting globalize the Intifada, and when you're called on it, you're not willing to walk that back and say, well, maybe I shouldn't have said that. I think it is not unreasonable for someone to conclude that he might be an anti-Semite.
Yeah, that's how I would put it. Again, I don't know what's in his brain cells, but man, that's scary stuff.
And rapping about those Hamas people who he seemed to have an affinity for. This is not normal New York City politician behavior as we've understood it here.
Let me ask you this, Rich. You've been around the Democratic Party. That was your former party, I guess.
It still is. I am still a registered Democrat.
Right. So the Democratic Party has veered very far to the left since my old man was a Reagan-Nixon Democrat.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, working class people are not really welcome.
I can remember we talked about for my second book, which dealt with the back office crisis around the time the World Trade Center was being built. You had that famous hard hat riot.
Right. My father was just full disclosure.
Right.
My old man was in that riot because he was working on the Trade Center at the time.
And the hard hats in those days were all rock rib Democrats. That was the core of the Democratic Party. Regular guys like, your father and my father. That's not the case anymore. This is not your father's Democratic Party.
It's a party that's obsessed with intersectionality issues, race above class. I mean, you can go on, and it's a warped sort of neo-Marxist vision of the world. And listen, if you're going to go on the campaign trail and talk about neo-Marxism and issues like that, you're not going to sell a lot of voters. But if you don't call it out in a very direct way, which Andrew Cuomo did not do, I think you're not going to be able to confront the demon, face to face. I don't think you're going to do yourself any good. You might turn off voters. By the way, if he did that, if he ran like a slash and burn campaign, he would have some justification to demand that independent line right now.
In hindsight, that could be the case. What's shocking to me, Charlie, is that Mamdani ran best among white and Asian college-educated New Yorkers.
That doesn't shock me.
They've been very poorly.
They're totally indoctrinated.
Right. That's the point.
Yeah.
And he did not do as well among black voters, and it was about even with Hispanic voters.
Well, look at the one borough that hasn't gentrified. It's the Bronx.
Right.
Andrew won the Bronx.
And obviously Staten Island.
And Staten Island, that's right.
Yep.
By the
So
way,
in all those gentrified yuppie places, they're the Mamdani people.
It's just fascinating.
Yeah.
Richard, one thing, you guys mentioned Hard Hat Riot. There is a great book called Hard Hat Riot by David Kuhn.
Oh yeah.
Great, great, great book. And it goes right into the antecedents of that election with Nixon. And it all started right down there on Wall Street.
It did.
It really
Well, I remember my father coming home that day, and we were watching, and my mom said, Daddy was going to be late. I mean, he was literally, what happened was he was working on the Trade Center. My dad was actually the foreman for the lobby of the Trade Center. But they're working on the Trade Center. There was this, I mean, now it's all done on, you get emails and Twitter. Back then, there was a sort of like whisper thing that started saying that the protesters are going to take over the New York Stock Exchange. And this was literally like 2 days after Kent State. So there was lots of protests in downtown Manhattan. There were a lot of flag burnings. And these guys, just so you know, if you knew the guys my dad grew up with, they all grew up in the Depression. They all served. My dad was a Marine, didn't fight in Korea. The war ended as he was about to go over. But these were tough guys who were World War II vets, and these guys worked hard. I mean, this was brutal work. My old man fell off scaffolds like 3 times. I think that's why he died young. So these were tough guys. Okay, they grew up in tenements, they grew up in housing projects and things like that, and they weren't going to be told by some kid that they were.
Yeah.
That they were.
Charlie, was worse than that. For months and months, the
Yeah.
long-haired hippies would come down there. They would block traffic because the World
Yeah.
Trade Center being built, it was very congested, and they would shout epithets at the hard hat guys and the Wall Street guys.
And by the way,
spit at
you
them.
don't. I just telling you, you don't shout epithets at wire laughers.
And finally, and after Kent State, where these guys said, you're burning down buildings, you're cutting fire hoses, and you're rushing after National Guard kids your own age. You're shocked that somebody shoots at
So
you.
what they did was they started at the Trade Center. They went down to Wall Street, cleared it out. And by the way, it was pretty brutal. They surrounded City Hall and demanded that the city raise the
flag. Correct.
And it was Stan Brezhnev, if you know who that was. He was
Right.
deputy mayor for Lindsay. I think it was Lindsay at the time.
It was
Raised
Lindsay.
the flags.
And Lindsay was too afraid to come downtown. He heard about the riot and
Yes.
stayed up at Gracie Mansion.
That's right.
And the cops at City Hall.
Oh, they didn't do it.
They let the hard hat guys come in and go up and raise the flag again. Yeah.
It was pretty amazing. One of the greatest counter protests in the history of mankind.
And then it went on and on. And then
Oh, yeah.
Brennan, who was the construction workers union guy, ultimately becomes the Secretary of Labor under Nixon because Nixon was so thrilled that they had organized the
Nixon
hard hat
sent
guys.
my father a thank you note. Every hard hat got a thank you note in his union.
And they brought Nixon said, this is great. We have people in favor of what we're trying to do against communism. He invited them to the White House. They got a hard hat with Nixon's name on it. Oh, it was just it was the complete opposite of
And
all
I just
of
want
the negative.
just full disclosure here on Risk and Reward, we do not advocate violence against hippies. Just so you know. We're gonna have to leave it there, Rich. Thank you. Great. So you would not be buying New York City municipal bonds right now. We're an investment show.
I think that when in the darkest hours, back up the truck because that's when the federal government comes over the top and your bonds go to par.
Okay, sounds great. Rich Farley, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us here on
My
Rich
pleasure.
Reward.
That was great. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you for having me.
Bob, I almost didn't want that to end. That was an amazing interview with Rich and learned a lot and brought back a lot of memories. Some of them good, some of them not so good. What was your takeaway from all that?
My takeaway was history repeats itself. Ken Auletta's The Streets Were Paved with Gold. Rich's book, Drop Dead. History repeats itself. I hope we don't go through another 1970s. You lived it. I lived it. Let's not live that again.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Hopefully hopefully the good Lord intervenes here or something. Thank you for watching another episode of Risk and Return. We'll be back next week with some more stuff and some more of Bob's stock picks, and the news just keeps coming. So stay tuned.
Thank you for watching.